It was a cold, stormy evening. The sky above was a dark blanket of clouds, and the wind howled through the streets, making the city feel even more lonely and deserted. Jack, a man in his mid-30s, trudged home from another long day at work. His shoulders were heavy with exhaustion, and his mind replayed the meetings, the deadlines, and the endless tasks he had left unfinished. It was always the same. Work was draining, and life felt like a never-ending cycle. All he wanted now was to reach his small apartment, take a warm shower, and curl up with a book to escape the weight of the world for just a little while. As Jack walked down his usual route, his footsteps echoing through the empty street, he noticed something unusual. It was a small movement in the corner of his eye. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the darkness. At first, he thought it was just the wind moving a pile of trash or a piece of paper blowing across the sidewalk. But then he saw it again, a tiny, fragile creature huddled in the corner of a nearby alley. It was a cat. A small, shivering cat, its fur matted and damp from the rain. The poor thing was curled up as if trying to protect itself from the cold, its eyes wide and filled with fear. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had always loved animals, and the sight of this little creature alone in the storm made something stir inside him. He took a step closer, his feet moving almost automatically. The cat didn't move. It just sat there, trembling, its eyes fixed on Jack, watching him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. There was something about the way it looked at him that felt desperate, the kind of look that someone would give if they had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Jack stopped in his tracks. He felt a sudden weight in his chest. His thoughts raced. Should I approach it? He wondered. What if it's afraid of me? What if it's sick or hurt? He glanced around the alley, but there was no one else in sight. The street was silent except for the sound of the wind and the occasional car passing by in the distance. It was just him and the cat, both strangers to one another, caught in a world of their own. The cat's eyes never left Jack. In the dim light of the street lamp, Jack could see the fear in its gaze. But there was also something else, something almost pleading. The kind of look that made Jack feel as if the cat was silently begging for help. Could it be lost? Jack wondered. Maybe it was abandoned. He took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of his foot hitting the wet pavement seemed loud in the silence. The cat didn't move. It remained frozen in place, watching him closely. Jack took another step, his breath coming in short, careful gasps. He was only a few feet away now. He could almost reach out and touch the small animal, but something held him back. What if it runs away? What if it doesn't trust me? He thought. For a moment, Jack stood there, just watching the cat. The wind gusted through the alley, making the cat's fur stand on end, but it didn't move. It seemed as if the cat, too, was trying to decide what to do. Should it run away to find shelter in the storm? Or should it trust this man, this stranger who was standing so close, yet so far away? Jack felt a strange pull inside him. He had always been the kind of person who couldn't ignore suffering, especially when it came to animals. As he watched the cat's trembling form, something inside him broke. The cat needed help, and it was clear that it wasn't going to survive out here alone in the cold. He stepped closer again, his voice soft. "Hey, little one," Jack murmured, hoping to soothe the frightened creature. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." But the moment Jack took another step, the cat's eyes widened even more. Its body tensed, and before Jack could even react, the cat darted away, disappearing into the darkness of the alley. It happened so quickly that Jack didn't even have time to stop it. 1 minute, the cat was there, and the next, it was gone. Jack stood frozen, staring into the empty alley. He could still hear the sound of the cat's tiny paws clicking against the wet pavement as it ran, but it was already too far away for him to catch up. He felt a strange mix of disappointment and confusion. What just happened? He wondered. Why did it run? For a moment, Jack stood there, lost in his thoughts. Had he been too forward? Had the cat been too scared to trust him? Or had it just been too used to being alone, too afraid to let anyone get close? Jack sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. He turned to leave, feeling a sense of helplessness wash over him. Maybe I was wrong to think I could help, he thought. But just as he was about to walk away, he paused. Something about that little cat, huddled in the alley, stayed with him. It wasn't just the fear in its eyes. It was the way it had looked at him, as if it had been waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care. Jack shook his head. No, he thought. I can't just leave it like this. The next day, Jack couldn't get the image of the small, frightened cat out of his mind. As he sat at his desk at work, his thoughts kept drifting back to the cold alley and the desperate look in the cat's eyes. He tried to push it aside. After all, there were more important things to focus on, but something deep inside him refused to let it go. His lunch break came, and he found himself walking down the same street he had walked the night before. The weather was still cold, but there was no rain today, and the wind had calmed. It almost felt like the universe was giving him a chance to fix what had happened the night before. He didn't know why he was so determined. He had never been the type to jump into things without thinking. Yet today, something about that tiny cat stirred a sense of responsibility in him. As he approached the alley, Jack felt his heart race. He didn't know what he expected to find. Would the cat be there again, still scared and alone? Or had it found a safer place to hide? He stepped into the alley slowly, almost tiptoeing, as if afraid to disturb the silence. To his surprise, there was no sign of the cat. He stood in the alley for a moment, looking around. The garbage bins were pushed up against the walls, and the puddles from the rain still reflected the dull light of the street lamps. Everything seemed still. Maybe the cat had moved on, or maybe it was too frightened to come out again. Jack let out a frustrated sigh. He was about to turn and leave when he noticed something. There, near a stack of cardboard boxes, was a small bowl, empty, but recently used. His eyes widened. It was a sign. Someone had cared enough to feed the cat. Jack knelt down to take a closer look. The bowl was dirty, and it seemed like it had been sitting there for a while, but it hadn't been discarded. It was clear that someone had tried to help the cat, just like he had wanted to. But who? Was it a neighbor? Another kind soul who couldn't leave the poor creature alone in the cold? Jack stood up, a new wave of determination flooding over him. He wouldn't give up on this cat. It wasn't just about offering a warm meal. It was about giving this animal a chance to be safe, a chance to trust again. He couldn't just walk away. The image of the cat's wide, frightened eyes haunted him, and he knew he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. He quickly made up his mind. He would come back every day. He would leave food and water and wait patiently, hoping that the cat would learn to trust him, just like he had trusted the kindness of strangers when he was young. With a new sense of purpose, Jack headed home that evening, his thoughts focused on what he could do to help. He made a list in his head. A small bowl for food, some dry kibble, maybe a blanket or a towel to keep the cat warm. Jack had no experience taking care of stray animals, but he had enough love in his heart to make up for that. The following evening after work, Jack returned to the alley. This time, he brought a small bowl filled with canned tuna and some fresh water. He set the bowl down in the same spot, hoping the cat would find it. Then he stepped back and waited, just as he had done the night before. Minutes passed, then 15 minutes. Jack began to wonder if the cat had left the area for good, but just as he was about to give up, he heard the softest sound, a faint meow. Jack's heart leaped in his chest. There, just a few feet away, was the cat. It had appeared from the shadows, its eyes locked on the food Jack had left out. For a moment, it just stood there, watching him carefully. Jack didn't move, afraid that if he did, the cat would run away again. He stood perfectly still, his heart pounding as the cat took a few tentative steps forward. The cat's fur was still wet and matted, but its gaze softened as it inched closer to the bowl. It sniffed the food, then looked up at Jack once more. This time, there was no fear in its eyes, only a quiet curiosity. The cat took a small bite of the tuna, then another, as if it had been starving. Jack couldn't help but smile. He felt a rush of warmth in his chest, like a piece of the puzzle was finally falling into place. He didn't speak, not wanting to startle the cat, but he took a small step back, giving it space. He was making progress, he realized. Little by little, he was earning the cat's trust. The next few days passed in much the same way. Jack would visit the alley every evening, bringing food and water, and the cat would slowly grow more comfortable with him. It didn't come close enough to let Jack touch it yet, but the gap between them was slowly closing. The cat was learning that Jack wasn't a threat. It was starting to trust him. But Jack knew it wasn't enough to just feed the cat. He had to do more. The cold nights were harsh, and the alley wasn't a safe place for a little creature like that. Jack knew that if he didn't act soon, the cat might not survive. One evening, as Jack stood waiting for the cat to appear, he made a decision. "I'll bring the cat home," he thought. "I'll give it a place to stay where it will be safe." A week had passed since Jack first saw the little cat in the alley. Each evening, he returned with food and water, and each time the cat appeared a little less frightened and a little more curious about him. Jack felt like they were making progress, step by step. The cat would now eat while Jack stood a few feet away, and though it still kept its distance, it no longer ran at the slightest sound. Jack was patient, never pushing too hard. He wanted the cat to trust him on its own terms, but in his heart, he couldn't wait for the day he could finally scoop the little creature up and take it to safety. He imagined it curled up on his couch, warm and safe, purring softly. That image gave him hope. One chilly evening, Jack arrived at the alley with a plan. This time, he brought not only food but also a small towel he had warmed up in the dryer before leaving his apartment. He thought maybe the cat could use it as a blanket, something to keep it warm through the night. As he set the bowl of food down, he gently placed the towel nearby. Then he stepped back, just like always, and waited. The cat appeared after a few minutes, emerging from the shadows with its usual cautious steps. Jack smiled as he watched it approach the food. Its tiny paws moved so lightly on the ground that it barely made a sound. Jack noticed that the cat's fur looked a little cleaner today, and it didn't shiver as much as before. It was a small improvement, but to Jack, it felt like a victory. As the cat ate, Jack decided to try something new. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. His voice was gentle, barely above a whisper. "You're doing so well. I just want to help you, that's all." The cat paused, lifting its head to look at Jack. Its green eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jack thought he saw trust flicker in its gaze. Encouraged, he reached out a hand, moving it slowly toward the cat. His heart raced with anticipation. This could be the moment he had been waiting for, the moment the cat finally let him get close enough to touch it. But just as Jack's fingers were within inches of the cat, a sudden noise shattered the quiet of the alley. A loud crash echoed from the nearby street, where someone had dropped a metal trash can. The sound was jarring, sharp, and unexpected. The cat's reaction was immediate. Its ears flattened, its body tensed, and its eyes widened in panic. In a split second, it bolted, darting away from Jack and disappearing into the shadows. Jack froze, his outstretched hand still hovering in the air. His heart sank as he watched the empty alley, the cat now nowhere in sight. "Wait," Jack called out instinctively, but it was no use. The cat was gone. He sat back on his heels, frustration and sadness washing over him. He had been so close. It felt like all the progress they had made over the past week had been erased in an instant. Jack sat in the alley for a long time, staring at the spot where the cat had been. The warm towel lay untouched, and the bowl of food sat half-eaten. He couldn't help but feel like he had failed. "Why did I reach out?" he thought. I should have waited longer. I should have known it wasn't ready. But deep down, Jack knew it wasn't his fault. The cat had been through so much. He could see it in the way it flinched at loud noises, the way it kept its distance even when it was hungry. Whatever life the cat had lived before he found it, it hadn't been easy. It wasn't just fear that kept the cat away. It was survival instinct, and that kind of fear didn't go away overnight. As Jack got up to leave, he made himself a promise. He wouldn't give up. The cat might be scared now, but he would keep coming back, no matter how many times it ran away. He would prove to the little creature that not all humans were bad, that it didn't have to be afraid anymore. The next evening, Jack returned to the alley with fresh food and water, just as he always did. He didn't know if the cat would come back, but he had to try. He set everything up as usual, then sat down on a small crate nearby, waiting in silence. Minutes turned into an hour, and just when Jack thought the cat might not show up, he heard the softest rustle. His eyes darted to the shadows, and there it was, the little cat, peeking out cautiously from behind a stack of boxes. It didn't move right away, its eyes scanning the alley as if making sure it was safe. Jack stayed perfectly still, not wanting to startle it again. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice steady and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cat hesitated but eventually took a tentative step forward, then another. It reached the bowl of food and began to eat, its movements slow and careful. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. The cat hadn't given up on him, just as he hadn't given up on it. As he watched the little creature eat, Jack felt a renewed sense of hope. It would take time, and it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to be patient. Building trust wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something earned, piece by piece, and Jack was ready to earn it. The next evening, Jack prepared to visit the alley again. This time, he carried not only food and water, but also a small carrier he had bought earlier that day. He didn't plan to force the cat into it. It was too soon for that. But he wanted to be ready for the moment when trust would finally overcome fear. As he walked to the alley, the cold air stung his cheeks, and his breath came out in white puffs. Yet, despite the freezing weather, he felt a sense of warmth in his chest. The little cat had returned after running away the previous night, and that gave Jack hope. No matter how scared it seemed, the cat hadn't completely shut him out. When Jack reached the alley, he followed the same routine as before. He set the food down in the usual spot and poured fresh water into the bowl. He laid a soft towel nearby, hoping the cat would use it for comfort. Then he stepped back and waited, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Minutes passed, and there was no sign of the cat. Jack's eyes scanned the dark corners of the alley, searching for any movement. He began to wonder if the events of the previous night had scared the little creature off for good. But then, out of the shadows, the cat appeared. It moved cautiously, its body low to the ground, as if ready to run at the first sign of danger. Jack stayed completely still, not wanting to spook it. He watched as the cat slowly approached the food bowl. Its green eyes flicked between the food and Jack, studying him carefully. "It's okay," Jack whispered. "I'm just here to help, little one." The cat hesitated, then took a bite of the food. Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. The cat was eating, and it hadn't run away. That was progress. After a few minutes, Jack decided to take another small step toward building trust. Slowly, he lowered himself to the ground, sitting cross-legged a few feet away from the cat. He kept his movements gentle, his body language open. To his surprise, the cat didn't run. It stopped eating for a moment, its ears twitching as it watched Jack, but it didn't move away. Jack felt his heart leap. This was the closest he had ever been to the little creature without scaring it off. "You're a brave one," Jack said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I bet you've been through a lot, huh? But you don't have to be afraid anymore. I'll take care of you. I promise." The cat continued to eat, its movements slow and deliberate. Jack stayed where he was, not daring to move closer. He knew it would take time, but he could feel the walls between them beginning to crumble, piece by piece. When the cat finished eating, it surprised Jack by not immediately running away. Instead, it sat down near the bowl, licking its paws and glancing at Jack every so often. Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The cat was starting to trust him. Jack decided to test the waters further. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crinkly toy mouse he had bought earlier that day. He placed it on the ground a few feet in front of him and gently nudged it toward the cat. The cat's ears perked up at the sound of the crinkling toy. It tilted its head, watching the little mouse with curiosity. Slowly, it reached out a paw and batted at the toy. Jack chuckled softly, his heart swelling at the sight. For the first time, the cat looked more curious than afraid. "See, it's just a toy," Jack said, his voice warm and encouraging. "Something for you to play with." The cat played with the toy for a few moments, batting it back and forth. Then it did something Jack didn't expect. It looked directly at him, its green eyes steady and unafraid, and let out a soft meow. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was the first time the cat had made a sound in his presence, and to him, it felt like a breakthrough. "Hey there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're really starting to trust me, aren't you?" The cat blinked slowly, its gaze calm and steady. Jack had heard somewhere that slow blinking was a sign of trust in cats, and he felt a wave of emotion well up inside him. He blinked back at the cat, hoping to communicate his own trust and affection. For the next few minutes, Jack and the cat sat there in the quiet alley, a strange but beautiful understanding passing between them. Jack didn't try to reach out or touch the cat. He knew it wasn't ready for that yet. But in that moment, he felt closer to the little creature than ever before. As the evening grew colder, the cat eventually got up and retreated back into the shadows. Jack didn't feel disappointed this time. He knew that trust wasn't something that could be rushed. The fact that the cat had stayed with him for so long was a victory in itself. Jack packed up the empty bowl and the toy mouse, leaving the towel behind in case the cat wanted to use it for warmth. As he walked home that night, his heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. He was no longer just a man walking home from work every evening. He was someone who had made a connection, however small, with a little soul who needed him. Jack knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt truly hopeful. The bond between him and the cat was growing, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. Another cold evening arrived, and Jack found himself walking to the alley as if it had become a part of his daily routine. His bag carried the usual supplies: food, water, and a small blanket. But tonight, Jack felt something different. The trust between him and the little cat had been growing steadily, and he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight might be the night things would truly change. As he entered the alley, the now familiar sound of the wind whipping through the narrow space greeted him. He placed the food and water in their usual spot and spread the soft blanket on the ground nearby. Then he stepped back and sat on the same crate, keeping his distance, but making his presence known. It didn't take long for the cat to appear. Jack watched as it crept out of the shadows, its movements cautious but not as hesitant as before. Over the past few days, the cat had begun to approach Jack with less fear. And tonight, it didn't even stop to assess the situation. It walked straight to the food bowl and began to eat. Jack couldn't help but smile. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, his voice calm and soothing. "You're looking braver every day. I'm proud of you." The cat glanced up at him, its green eyes meeting his for a moment before it returned to its meal. Jack noticed that its fur, though still a little scruffy, looked healthier now. Regular meals and a bit of warmth seemed to be making the difference. As the cat ate, Jack decided to take a chance. He reached into his bag and pulled out the toy mouse again. Holding it in his hand, he gently placed it on the ground a little closer to himself this time. The cat noticed the movement and paused, its ears twitching. Jack stayed still, giving the cat time to decide whether it wanted to investigate. After a moment, The cat stepped toward the toy, sniffing it cautiously. Then it began to bat at it with its paw, just like before. Jack's heart swelled. He stayed quiet, watching as the cat played with the toy, its movements growing more confident and playful. It was the first time he had seen the cat act like a carefree kitten, and it made him realize just how much it must have endured before finding this small corner of safety. After a while, the cat did something unexpected. It stopped playing with the toy and looked directly at Jack. Then, slowly and cautiously, it took a step toward him. Jack held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The cat took another step, then another, until it was just a few feet away from where he sat. "Hey, it's okay," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cat stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing its options. Then, to Jack's amazement, it stepped closer and stretched out its nose to sniff his hand. Jack stayed perfectly still, letting the cat take the lead. When the cat's nose brushed against his fingers, Jack felt a rush of emotion. It was the first time the little creature had willingly come so close to him. Slowly, he turned his hand palm up, keeping his movements gentle. The cat hesitated but didn't pull away. Instead, it lowered its head and sniffed his hand again. Then, as if deciding to take a leap of faith, it pressed its head lightly against his fingers. Jack felt his breath catch. The soft, warm touch of the cat's fur against his skin was like a breakthrough, a moment of trust that he had been waiting for. Carefully, he moved his hand, gently stroking the cat's head. "You're so brave," Jack murmured, his voice filled with awe. "I knew you had it in you." The cat closed its eyes for a moment, leaning into his touch. Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. This small, fragile creature, who had been so afraid and alone, was finally letting him in. For several minutes, Jack sat there, petting the cat gently as it purred softly under his hand. The sound was like music to his ears, a sign that the cat was beginning to feel safe with him. Eventually, the cat pulled back and returned to the food bowl, eating the rest of its meal. Jack didn't mind. He knew this was just the beginning. The fact that the cat had trusted him enough to let him touch it was more than he could have hoped for. As the evening grew darker, Jack packed up his things and stood to leave. He looked at the cat, who was now curled up on the blanket he had left behind. "Good night, little one," he said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." As Jack walked away, he felt a sense of joy and fulfillment that he hadn't felt in years. The bond between him and the cat had taken a huge step forward, and he knew that their journey together was far from over. The next evening, Jack walked to the alley with a nervous but hopeful heart. He carried the usual food and water, but this time he had brought something new, a small, cozy pet carrier lined with a soft fleece blanket. Jack had spent hours choosing the carrier, making sure it would be comfortable and safe for the cat. He had debated whether he was moving too fast, whether the cat was truly ready for this step, but the cold nights were growing harsher, and Jack couldn't bear the thought of leaving the little creature out here any longer. He had earned its trust, at least a small part of it, and now he was determined to give it the warmth and safety it deserved. As Jack entered the alley, he noticed something different. The cat wasn't hiding in the shadows this time. It was sitting near the spot where Jack usually left the food, as if waiting for him. Jack's heart swelled at the sight. "Hey, little one," he said softly, kneeling down to place the food and water in front of the cat. "I see you're getting comfortable here. That's good." The cat looked up at him, its green eyes calm and curious. It didn't flinch or back away when Jack reached out to gently stroke its head. Instead, it leaned into his touch, letting out a soft purr. Jack smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection. "You've come so far," he said, his voice warm. "I think you're ready for a new home. What do you think?" The cat tilted its head as if it understood him, then resumed eating. Jack watched it for a moment before pulling the carrier from his bag. He placed it a few feet away from the cat, leaving the door open. Inside, he had tucked a small piece of the blanket the cat had been using in the alley, hoping the familiar scent would make it feel more comfortable. At first, the cat didn't seem to notice the carrier. It continued eating, content, and calm. But when it finished, it turned its attention to the strange new object. The cat sniffed the air, its whiskers twitching, and cautiously approached the carrier. Jack held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to force the cat into the carrier. It had to be its choice. He sat perfectly still, letting the cat explore at its own pace. The cat sniffed the edge of the carrier, then stepped inside with one cautious paw. It paused, looking back at Jack as if seeking reassurance. "It's okay," Jack said gently. "It's just a cozy little spot for you. You'll be safe in there, I promise." The cat hesitated for a moment longer, then stepped fully inside the carrier. It turned around a few times, sniffing the blanket, before finally settling down. Jack could hardly believe his eyes. The cat had willingly entered the carrier, as if it knew Jack's intentions and trusted him enough to go along with them. Jack slowly reached out and closed the carrier door, securing it carefully. The cat didn't panic or try to escape. It simply looked at him with those steady green eyes, its trust in him clear. Jack stood up, holding the carrier close to his chest. "We're going home," he said softly. "No more cold nights for you, little one." As Jack walked back to his apartment, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief, joy, and a sense of responsibility. This tiny creature, who had once been so terrified and alone, was now depending on him, and Jack was determined to give it the love and care it deserved. When they arrived at Jack's apartment, he placed the carrier on the floor and opened the door, giving the cat the freedom to explore. At first, the cat stayed inside, its eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings, but after a few minutes, it cautiously stepped out, its paws sinking into the soft carpet. Jack watched with a smile as the cat wandered around, sniffing every corner of the room. He had set up a small bed for it near the window, along with a bowl of fresh water and a dish of food. There were even a few toys scattered around, waiting to be discovered. "You're safe now," Jack said, crouching down to meet the cat's gaze. "This is your home." The cat looked at him, then walked over and brushed against his leg, purring softly. Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. This small gesture of trust and affection was all the reward he needed. As the evening wore on, the cat grew more comfortable, eventually curling up on the soft bed Jack had prepared. Jack sat nearby, watching it with a heart full of gratitude. He had saved this little creature, but in many ways, it felt like the cat had saved him too. For the first time in years, Jack felt a sense of purpose and connection he hadn't known he was missing. This was just the beginning of their journey together, but Jack knew one thing for certain: neither of them would ever feel alone again. The first night in Jack's apartment was quiet, but it was filled with a kind of warmth neither Jack nor the cat had felt in a long time. The cat slept peacefully on the little bed near the window, its tiny body curled up like it finally felt safe. Jack sat on his couch, watching the cat with a soft smile. He couldn't believe how much his life had changed in just a few days. Morning arrived, and sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in a golden glow. Jack woke to the sound of soft paws pattering on the floor. He turned to see the cat exploring the apartment, its tail held high with curiosity. "Good morning, little one," Jack greeted, his voice light and cheerful. The cat stopped and looked at him, letting out a tiny meow before hopping onto the couch beside him. Jack chuckled. "I see you're making yourself at home already." Jack reached out to gently stroke the cat's back, and it leaned into his hand, purring softly. The sound filled the room, a reminder of how far they had come. Only days ago, this same cat had been terrified and alone in a dark alley, but now it was showing Jack the kind of trust and affection that only came from love. After breakfast, kibble for the cat and toast for Jack, they sat by the window together. Jack sipped his coffee while the cat perched on the sill, watching the world outside. The sight of the cat's peaceful face made Jack's heart swell with joy. He thought about naming the cat. What should I call you? He wondered aloud. He ran through a list of names in his mind, but kept coming back to one. Hope. It felt right, a perfect reflection of what the little creature had brought into his life. Hope, Jack said softly, testing the name. The cat turned to him, tilting its head as if it understood. Jack smiled. Yeah, that's your name now. Hope. The next few weeks were filled with small but meaningful moments that brought Jack and Hope closer. Jack learned that Hope loved to chase the toy mouse around the living room and nap in the warm patch of sunlight near the window. Hope learned that Jack's lap was the perfect spot for curling up, especially during quiet evenings spent reading or watching TV. One day, as Jack sat on the couch, with Hope purring contentedly in his lap, he reflected on how much his life had changed. Before Hope, his days had felt monotonous and empty. But now, every moment was filled with purpose and joy. Hope had reminded him of something he had long forgotten: the power of connection and compassion. Jack also noticed that Hope had started to change too. The scruffy, fearful cat he had first met in the alley was now a vibrant, confident companion. Hope's fur had grown shiny and soft, and the sparkle in its green eyes was brighter than ever. One evening, as they sat together by the window, Jack spoke softly to Hope. "You know, I think we saved each other," he said. "I gave you a home, but you gave me something even more important. You reminded me what it means to care, to love, and to hope." Hope looked up at him, blinking slowly, and Jack felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. This tiny creature had brought so much light into his life, and he knew he would do everything in his power to keep that light shining. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Jack and Hope settled into a routine that felt like home. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Jack couldn't imagine his life without the little cat who had changed everything. The once lonely streets of the city seemed distant now, a reminder of where their journey had begun. But for Jack and Hope, those dark, cold nights were behind them. Together, they had found a new beginning, one filled with warmth, love, and endless possibilities. And in the quiet moments, as they sat by the window or snuggled on the couch, Jack would often whisper to Hope, "You're my little miracle." And Hope, with its gentle purrs and soft green eyes, seemed to say, "And you're mine." The first night in Jack's apartment was quiet, but it was filled with a kind of warmth neither Jack nor the cat had felt in a long time. The cat slept peacefully on the little bed near the window, its tiny body curled up like it finally felt safe. Jack sat on his couch, watching the cat with a soft smile. He couldn't believe how much his life had changed in just a few days. Morning arrived, and sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in a golden glow. Jack woke to the sound of soft paws pattering on the floor. He turned to see the cat exploring the apartment, its tail held high with curiosity. "Good morning, little one," Jack greeted, his voice light and cheerful. The cat stopped and looked at him, letting out a tiny meow before hopping onto the couch beside him. Jack chuckled. "I see you're making yourself at home already." Jack reached out to gently stroke the cat's back, and it leaned into his hand, purring softly. The sound filled the room, a reminder of how far they had come. Only days ago, this same cat had been terrified and alone in a dark alley, but now it was showing Jack the kind of trust and affection that only came from love. After breakfast, kibble for the cat and toast for Jack, they sat by the window together. Jack sipped his coffee while the cat perched on the sill, watching the world outside. The sight of the cat's peaceful face made Jack's heart swell with joy. He thought about naming the cat. "What should I call you?" he wondered aloud. He ran through a list of names in his mind, but kept coming back to one. Hope. It felt right, a perfect reflection of what the little creature had brought into his life. "Hope," Jack said softly, testing the name. The cat turned to him, tilting its head as if it understood. Jack smiled. "Yeah, that's your name now. Hope." The The next few weeks were filled with small but meaningful moments that brought Jack and Hope closer. Jack learned that Hope loved to chase the toy mouse around the living room and nap in the warm patch of sunlight near the window. Hope learned that Jack's lap was the perfect spot for curling up, especially during quiet evenings spent reading or watching TV. One day, as Jack sat on the couch, with Hope purring contentedly in his lap, he reflected on how much his life had changed. Before Hope, his days had felt monotonous and empty. But now, every moment was filled with purpose and joy. Hope had reminded him of something he had long forgotten: the power of connection and compassion. Jack also noticed that Hope had started to change too. The scruffy, fearful cat he had first met in the alley was now a vibrant, confident companion. Hope's fur had grown shiny and soft, and the sparkle in its green eyes was brighter than ever. One evening, as they sat together by the window, Jack spoke softly to Hope. "You know, I think we saved each other," he said. "I gave you a home, but you gave me something even more important. You reminded me what it means to care, to love, and to hope." Hope looked up at him, blinking slowly, and Jack felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. This tiny creature had brought so much light into his life, and he knew he would do everything in his power to keep that light shining. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Jack and Hope settled into a routine that felt like home. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Jack couldn't imagine his life without the little cat who had changed everything. The once lonely streets of the city seemed distant now, a reminder of where their journey had begun. But for Jack and Hope, those dark, cold nights were behind them. Together, they had found a new beginning, one filled with warmth, love, and endless possibilities. And in the quiet moments, as they sat by the window or snuggled on the couch, Jack would often whisper to Hope, "You're my little miracle." And Hope, with its gentle purrs and soft green eyes, seemed to say, "And you're mine."